Senators introduced legislation to gut the renewable fuel standard. The Restore Act is seen as a disappointing move for the ethanol industry and corn producers alike, as the bill would force more petroleum into our nation's fuel supply. Joining us now with an update is Renewable Fuels Association President and CEO Jeff Cooper. Thanks so much for spending some time with us today, Jeff. So let's start with what this legislation aims to do and what flaws you see in it.
Well, thanks, Christina, and you're correct that just last week, Senators Feinstein from California and Toomey from Pennsylvania introduced again a bill that they have introduced in past Congresses that would essentially eliminate the portion of the renewable fuel standard that corn ethanol qualifies for. So that 15 billion gallons per year of corn ethanol and other conventional renewable fuels would be eliminated under this program. What the senators don't seem to understand, though, is they call it a corn ethanol elimination act. There is no corn ethanol mandate per se under the RFS. It just happens that corn ethanol is the lowest cost, most affordable, most economical way for oil refineries to meet their obligations under the RFS. So this would make it even harder for oil companies to meet those obligations and of course, would force more petroleum products into our nation's fuel supply.
You know, it's interesting to see Senator Dianne Feinstein from California, a very air quality conscious state, pushing for this. Speak to the significant role that corn ethanol has played in achieving the goals of low carbon fuels.
Well, that one really does cause us to scratch our heads because, as you pointed out, Senator Feinstein portends to care very deeply about greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. And so we're really confused why she would sponsor this legislation when in her own state, in her home state of California, the California government says that corn ethanol has played a significant role in reducing that state's greenhouse gas emissions. Roughly half of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions achieved under their state's low-carbon fuel program have come from corn ethanol. So we don't understand why she isn't taking a little closer look and a more careful look at what's happening in her own state before sponsoring this sort of messaging bill that we saw last week.
What do you expect to see moving forward? Where do we go from here?
Well, fortunately, we don't see this legislation going anywhere. We don't think it has legs. Again, this exact legislation has been introduced in the past and has died in committee. We expect that to happen again this year, but we are concerned about the myths and misinformation that these senators are putting out there as they introduce this bill, and the suggestion that eliminating the RFS would somehow restore environmental sustainability, which is what they're claiming, is laughable. What it would do is it would require more petroleum fuels, and we know all of the issues associated with that, whether it's oil spills, increased carbon emissions. You look at the earthquakes in fracking country, and we could go on and on. So that's the big concern here, is just the message and the misinformation that is being propagated by these senators.
Before we wrap, the Renewable Fuels Association has invited EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler to visit an ethanol plant as a follow-up to his tour of a Pennsylvania oil refinery. What are your hopes there?
Well, in fact, Senator Toomey from Pennsylvania, who is one of the sponsors of this legislation we've been talking about, did invite Administrator Wheeler to a Pennsylvania refinery just yesterday. They toured that refinery. And we know they got an earful from the folks at Monroe Energy in Pennsylvania about the RFS, about small refinery exemptions, and about all these other issues. We just want to make sure the administrator has both sides of the story. We want to make sure that he has an opportunity to speak with workers at our ethanol plants, speak with the farmers who depend on those ethanol plants as a local market for their corn. And it's just, it's about balance. We expect our elected and appointed officials to hear both sides of the stories before they make these sorts of important decisions.
RFA President and CEO Jeff Cooper, thank you for joining us today.